Imagine waking up one morning, stepping outside to enjoy your peaceful rural property, only to find an entire house, fully built, standing on your land. Not a misplaced shed, not a fence creeping over the property line, but a whole, full-sized, someone lives here house. And the worst part, the person who built it doesn't think they've done anything wrong. In fact, they think you're the problem. That's exactly what happened when Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of neighborhood order, decided that property laws didn't apply to her. She wasn't just your run-of-the-mill HOA busybody. She was a force of suburban chaos wrapped in pastel capri pants and armed with an endless supply of complaint letters. She had spent months nitpicking every minor detail of the neighborhood, enforcing imaginary HOA rules that no one had agreed to. And then, one day, she took things to a whole new level. She built her dream house on land that wasn't even hers. How did this happen? How did a woman with no legal claim to a property manage to construct an entire home on someone else's land? And more importantly, how did she think she could get away with it? Well, let me tell you, it was a battle of entitlement, audacity, and one delicious serving of karma. Hello, beautiful peoples. Before we dive in, let me know, where are you watching this from? Tell in the comments and subscribe. It was supposed to be a quiet, peaceful life. Wide open land, no pesky neighbors peeking over fences, and certainly no one telling me what color I could paint my own front door. That's why I moved to this rural area in the first place. Out here, there was no HOA, no committee of clipboard-wielding busybodies nitpicking every blade of grass. It was just me, my property, and the freedom to live without interference. And then Karen showed up. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was that neighbor, the kind who believed she was in charge whether anyone agreed with her or not. The self-appointed enforcer of imaginary rules, the talking fine print at the bottom of a lease agreement. If there had been an official title for neighborhood nuisance, Karen would have laminated the certificate and hung it on her wall. The first time I met her, she was already on a mission. She marched up to my driveway, hands on her hips, scanning my property like a building inspector with a grudge. "You know," she said, her voice dripping with unsolicited authority, "your mailbox is an eyesore. It really should match the rest of the neighborhood." I blinked, looking around at the nearest houses, which were at least a quarter-mile away. "The rest of what neighborhood?" I asked. She scoffed as if I'd just suggested we all start keeping pet alligators. "We have standards here," she insisted, despite the fact that no official HOA existed. She then gestured toward my yard. "And that grass is looking a little wild." I glanced at my perfectly normal, well-maintained lawn. "Karen, this isn't the suburbs. It's rural land." She didn't like that answer. She didn't like a lot of answers, actually. From that day forward, she seemed determined to make it her personal mission to impose rules where none existed, handing out passive-aggressive letters like they were Halloween candy. I figured she'd get bored eventually. Maybe she'd find a new hobby, like knitting or bothering someone else. I had no idea what was coming next, because as annoying as Karen was, her real act of audacity had yet to be revealed. And when it did, it was something I never could have imagined. At first, Karen's antics were just an amusing inconvenience. She strutted around like she was the sheriff of an imaginary HOA, peering over fences, writing down violations in a little notebook, and sighing dramatically whenever she spotted something that offended her sensibilities. It was like living next to a one-woman homeowners association, except no one had actually signed up for it. Then she took it up a notch. One morning, I found a neatly folded piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. It was an official-looking notice, except it wasn't from any actual governing body. At the top, in bold, all-caps font, it read, "Neighborhood Code Violation." Underneath, in Karen's unmistakably aggressive handwriting, was a list of my supposed offenses. Mailbox is not uniform with neighborhood aesthetic. Grass exceeds acceptable length. Driveway has visible dirt spots, please power wash. Unauthorized garden gnome placement. Yes, she actually wrote that last one. I held the note in disbelief, then looked across the road. Karen was standing in her yard, pretending to prune a bush, but clearly watching for my reaction. When I caught her staring, she gave me a smug little nod, like a monarch who had just issued a royal decree. That's when I realized Karen wasn't just annoying, she was serious. Over the next few weeks, she doubled down. She started issuing verbal warnings to other neighbors, citing community regulations that she had seemingly invented on the spot. If a trash can wasn't brought in quickly enough, violation. If someone parked their truck on their own grass, violation. One poor guy, Tom, Even got a notice because, according to Karen, his porch light was too bright and disturbing the harmony of the night. "She's lost it," Tom whispered to me one afternoon. "Last week, she told me my cat was trespassing on her property." "Your cat?" "Yeah." Said he was loitering in her yard, looking suspicious. At first, I figured this was all just Karen on a power trip, some bizarre need to control her surroundings. But then, she did something that proved this wasn't just about neighborhood aesthetics or some personal vendetta against garden gnomes. Because while she was busy making up fake rules for everyone else, she had started bending the real ones for herself. And that's when things got interesting. I wasn't the kind of person to escalate drama, but when someone starts handing out fake violations for things like unauthorized garden gnomes, you have to draw the line somewhere. Karen clearly thrived on control, and the more people ignored her self-appointed authority, the more desperate she became to enforce it. At first, I tried the rational approach. One afternoon, as Karen stood in my driveway with a notepad, probably documenting the precise angle of my mailbox, I decided to confront her directly. "Karen," I said, forcing my politest tone, "there is no HOA here. You can't just make up rules." She scoffed, flipping through her notes as if they were backed by actual laws. "Well, technically, we should have won. It's only right that we keep things orderly. And besides, I've consulted some official HOA guidelines online. These are industry standards." I stared at her, blinking. "Karen, this is a rural property, not a gated community." She sighed dramatically, like a weary queen dealing with an unruly peasant. That's exactly the problem. Clearly, logic wasn't going to work. So I switched tactics. If Karen wanted to play neighborhood enforcer, I'd have a little fun with it. The next day, I carefully placed another garden gnome in my front yard, this time positioned directly facing Karen's house. A silent, ceramic act of defiance. When I saw her storm outside, stopping dead in her tracks at the sight of it, I knew I was onto something. Then I made sure to mow my lawn strategically, cutting it just short enough to avoid another violation, but long enough to irritate her. I even placed a single out-of-place lawn chair near my driveway, just to see how long it would take before. Not long, as it turned out. One morning, I stepped outside to find another note taped to my door. "Your property remains out of compliance. The following issues need to be corrected immediately. Unapproved lawn decor, additional gnome. Lawn height is questionable. Please review grass standards. Driveway obstruction, random chair." I chuckled, crumpling the note in my hand. It was almost too easy. As my subtle rebellion continued, Karen's reactions became more dramatic. One day, I caught her literally measuring the height of my grass with a ruler. Another time, she stood on the sidewalk with her arms crossed, glaring at my mailbox like it had personally insulted her. When I parked my truck facing the wrong direction just to mess with her, she left 3 notes on my windshield, each one angrier than the last. She wasn't just annoyed, she was obsessed. And the more I ignored her ridiculous demands, the more desperate she became to assert control. What I didn't realize at the time was that Karen was far from done. While I was busy playing defense, she was cooking up something much, much worse. It turns out, I wasn't the only one caught in Karen's web of nonsense. While she had made me her primary target, the rest of the neighborhood had their own Karen horror stories. And as I soon discovered, they were more than happy to share them. One evening, as I was enjoying a cold drink on my porch, Tom, my neighbor from down the road, walked over, shaking his head. "She's at it again," he muttered, hands in his pockets. "Let me guess," I said. "Another fake violation? Oh, it's worse this time." He looked over his shoulder as if Karen might be lurking in the bushes. "She called animal control on my cat." I nearly choked on my drink. "Wait, what?" Said he was wandering onto private property without permission. I stared at him, trying to process the sheer absurdity of it. "Karen tried to have your cat evicted?" He sighed. "Animal control showed up, saw my cat sunbathing on my porch, and just rolled their eyes. I think even they're getting sick of her." The Karen support group forms. The more I talked to my neighbors, the more I realized that everyone had a Karen story. Mrs. Jenkins from across the street had received a noise complaint because her wind chimes were too loud and disruptive to the peaceful environment. Mike had been told that his truck was an eyesore and needed to be properly concealed, despite the fact that he lived on 10 acres and his nearest neighbor was half a mile away. Lisa and her husband had gotten a warning about their Christmas lights being excessively festive and disturbing the nighttime aesthetic. At some point, we all started gathering for what became our unofficial Karen support group. swapping stories, comparing notes, and brainstorming ways to push back. One night, Tom leaned in with a conspiratorial grin. You know what we should do? Coordinate. Coordinate what? I asked. We should all put up garden gnomes. I laughed, but then I saw the gleam in his eye. He was serious. The neighborhood strikes back. And so the plan was set in motion. One by one, our neighbors quietly placed garden gnomes in their yards. It started small, one here, one there. Then it snowballed. Within a week, nearly every house on the road had at least one gnome prominently displayed, all facing Karen's house. When she stepped outside and saw what had happened, her face turned a shade of red that I'm fairly certain isn't found in nature. She stormed up and down the street, taking photos, muttering to herself, absolutely seething. That night, she left handwritten notes at every single house, demanding that we remove the unauthorized gnome decor immediately. Nobody did. Karen was unraveling, and the cracks in her iron grip were starting to show. But instead of backing down, she doubled down in the most Karen way possible. And that's when things really escalated. Karen was losing control, and she knew it. The fake violations, the aggressive notes, the gnome rebellion, none of it had worked. But instead of backing down, she did what all entitled people do when they feel cornered. She doubled down in the most outrageous way possible. One day, I came home to find her on my property. Not just peeking over the fence or standing on the sidewalk. No, she was actually inside my property line, walking around like she was inspecting a construction site. What the hell are you doing, Karen? I asked, crossing my arms. She didn't even flinch. I'm ensuring everything is up to community standards, she replied, waving a clipboard like it gave her some kind of legal authority. I gestured to the wide-open land behind my house. Karen, this isn't a community. This is private property. She narrowed her eyes, lips pursed like she had just sucked on a lemon. It's only a matter of time before this entire area is properly regulated, she huffed. I'm just getting ahead of things. I should have known then that Karen had something bigger planned. The shocking discovery. A few weeks later, I woke up early and went outside, coffee in hand, ready to enjoy a peaceful morning. Instead, I found something that nearly made me drop my mug. There, standing tall on my land, was a structure. Not a shed. Not a fence extension. An actual, fully built structure. At first, I thought I was seeing things. But no, there it was. Karen had somehow, without my knowledge or permission, built an extension of her property onto my land. I stormed over to her house, knocking so hard the door rattled. When she answered, she had the audacity to look annoyed, as if I were the problem. What is that? I demanded, pointing to the illegal construction. She blinked, all faux innocence. Oh, that, she said, waving a hand like it was no big deal. It's my new guest house. I stared at her. Your guest house is on my property. She shrugged. Well, you weren't using that land. I had to take a deep breath to stop myself from exploding. That's not how property ownership works, Karen. She huffed, crossing her arms. I spoke to the county about this, and there's a gray area regarding rural property lines. No, I cut her off. There isn't a gray area. This is trespassing and illegal construction. But Karen, in peak Karen fashion, wasn't fazed. Well, she said, tilting her chin up, I assumed you wouldn't mind. Oh, I minded. The legal hammer comes down. I immediately contacted the county and a lawyer. And as it turns out, Karen's little guest house wasn't just illegally placed, it was completely unpermitted. When the county inspector came out, the look on Karen's face was priceless. She tried to argue, of course, claiming she had spoken to someone who said it was probably fine. But county officials don't exactly operate on probably fine. Karen was hit with a massive list of violations. Illegal construction without a permit. Trespassing on private property. Failure to obtain zoning approval. Failure to meet setback requirements. And my personal favorite? Destruction of private land without owner consent. In short, Karen was completely, utterly screwed. She tried everything, begging, arguing, even claiming it was a miscommunication. But nothing worked. She was ordered to tear down the structure at her own expense, pay hefty fines, and receive an official warning from the county. And just when I thought things couldn't get any better, Karen's ultimate humiliation. During an emergency HOA-style meeting, which she insisted on holding, despite having zero authority, Karen tried to plead her case. I was only trying to make this neighborhood better, she wailed. Why is everyone against me? That's when someone from the crowd, I think it was Tom, raised a hand and said, Karen, if you love HOAs so much, Why don't you move to a place that actually has one? The entire room fell silent. Karen turned beet red. For the first time ever, she had no snarky comeback. No fake violation to issue. No way to weasel out of what she had done. And just like that, the reign of Karen was officially over. The fallout from Karen's illegal construction was swift and glorious. With county officials breathing down her neck and fines stacking up, she had no choice but to tear down the illegal guest house, at her own expense. Watching a demolition crew dismantle it piece by piece was chef's kiss satisfying. Every brick, every beam, every shingle she had so smugly placed on my land was ripped away, and with it, any illusion she had of being untouchable. But the best part? That wasn't even the end of her troubles. The HOA queen gets a taste of her own rules. Karen had spent so much time making up rules for everyone else, but as it turned out, she wasn't exactly following them herself. While digging through paperwork, I found something hilarious. Karen's own property had multiple violations she had conveniently ignored. Her fence was technically too tall based on local zoning laws. Her driveway extended past her property line onto public land. And the best part, her precious holiday decorations, which she had once tried to ban from Lisa's house, were in violation of municipal code because they blocked visibility from the street. I didn't even have to lift a finger. The same county officials who had slapped her with fines over the illegal guest house took one look at her property and tacked on even more. When she got the notice, she completely lost it. She stormed around the neighborhood, fuming, trying to shift the blame on anyone but herself. "This is harassment," she shrieked at one point, stomping past my yard. "I have a right to decorate my property however I want." Oh, the irony. Tom, ever the legend, simply leaned over his fence and said, "Welcome to the club, Karen." The neighborhood celebrates. Karen tried to fight it, of course. She wrote letters, made phone calls, probably considered summoning a lawyer from whatever alternate dimension entitled people come from. But in the end, it was useless. The county made her remove the violations, and without her fake authority to boss people around, she finally lost the control she so desperately craved. And just like that, the HOA Karen had tried to create crumbled around her. The neighborhood, now free from her reign of terror, decided to celebrate in the pettiest way possible. That weekend, every single house put up extra holiday decorations, gaudy, flashing lights, inflatable Santas, even a neon pink flamingo dressed as an elf. The gnomes? Still there, of course. Some even got festive outfits. Karen didn't stand a chance. She lasted a few more months, sulking in her increasingly ignored house. Then, one day, a moving truck appeared in her driveway. By sunset, she was gone. The sweet, sweet aftermath. Life after Karen was peaceful, just as it was meant to be. No more fake notices. No more rule enforcement. No more power-hungry neighborhood tyranny. As I sat on my porch, watching the sunset, Tom walked by and gave me a nod. "Looks like the grass is growing a little long," he joked. I laughed. Guess I better call the real authorities. And with that, the era of Karen was officially over. The neighborhood felt different after Karen left. Lighter. Freer. Almost like an invisible weight had been lifted from the air. Without her storming around with her clipboard, handing out fake violations, and peeking over fences like a paranoid prison warden, we could finally enjoy our homes in peace. Tom threw a small gathering the weekend after she left. Just a casual barbecue, but it might as well have been a victory party. The whole neighborhood showed up, and we toasted to the end of the Karen regime. "You know," Lisa said between bites of her burger, "I almost miss her." We all stared at her. She smirked. Not her, exactly. Just the entertainment. Life was never boring with Karen around. I laughed. True, but I'll take boredom over HOA tyranny any day. We reminisced about the absurdity of it all. The fake rules, the cat trespassing complaint, the Great Gnome Rebellion, and of course, the illegal guest house incident. Looking back, it was almost impressive how far Karen had been willing to go just to feel in charge. Peace returns to the neighborhood. With Karen gone, life returned to normal. The mailbox police were no more. The wind chimes could jingle in peace. Christmas lights could shine as brightly as we wanted. And best of all, no one had to worry about waking up to find a random structure built on their land. And the garden gnomes? They stayed. In fact, they became something of a neighborhood tradition. Every now and then, a new one would appear, tucked in someone's flower bed, peeking from behind a fence, always facing Karen's old house like a tiny ceramic reminder of the battle we had won. A final thought. As I sat on my porch one evening, enjoying a cold drink and the quiet hum of a peaceful neighborhood, I thought about Karen. Wherever she was now, I hoped she had finally found the perfect, real HOA to rule over. One where her clipboard and ruler measuring skills would finally be appreciated. And as for me, I leaned back in my chair, stretched out my legs, and smiled. The grass was growing freely. The mailboxes stood proudly unbothered. And for the first time in a long while, the neighborhood was exactly what it was supposed to be: home. What's your favorite petty revenge story against an overbearing HOA or entitled neighbor? If you could add one fake violation to give Karen a taste of her own medicine, what would it be? What's the best way to deal with an entitled neighbor who thinks they run the block? Would you have joined the Garden Gnome Rebellion, or would you have taken a different approach? If you enjoyed watching HOA Karen get exactly what she deserved, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more wild HOA and entitled people stories. Have you ever dealt with a Karen like this? Drop your craziest HOA horror story in the comments below. I love reading them. And remember, subscribing is 100% Karen-free. Bell turn on notifications so you never miss the next juicy drama.